It's a good day to have a good day. Hello, everybody. My name's Cece Ray. Thanks for joining me here at Break the Dish, where we break the news and dish out the tea. We are recapping The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Season 15, Reunion Part 3, and oh boy, do I have a lot to talk about. But before we get into it, you know what to do. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, because here we break the dish. We are recapping The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Season 15, the final part of the reunion, Part 3. This is it, Breakers. So let's just get into it, shall we? So we're picking it up right where the reunion left off, with Dorit questioning, like, how did she hurt Erika? And Erika's saying, look, by you saying that, like, how I had to save my job at the table. Like, you can call me a see you next Tuesday all day long. I don't care. She said, but when you say that to me, which is not true, it's hurtful. And Dorit says, but Erika, you unleashed on me. Erika's like, oh yeah, I did. And Erika says, when you said that Bo supported you the most out of anybody at that table, that's when I had enough. Dorit says, well, now that you're telling me this, I understand. And I understand that because I know that feeling. Because you did the same thing to Kyle and I at Anne Marie's house. And they recapped to when Erika was saying that the whole group had not supported them when Dorit and Kyle had supported her, So Andy says to Dorit, well, now you see that Erika has brought up two things that has really hurt her. Do you have anything to say, or do you want to apologize? Dorit says, apologize for what, Andy? Well, everybody kind of stops in their tracks for a second. And Dorit's like looking at him. Andy said, Dorit, what Erika's saying is that, like, you made her flip. Like, this made her flip. And Dorit says, well, I said I was sorry. Everyone's like, you did? She's like, I'm sorry, And she says, I did not want you to be made to feel that way. And she said, but Erika, you were one person, and then within 12 hours, you were a whole different person. And Erika says, no, Dorit, this was bubbling and building. And Kyle, like, jumps in, and she's like, yeah, you called her see you next Tuesday, like, over and over and over again, which she did not, by the way. And Dorit says, no, I didn't. But she said, basically, like, you're relentless. No, she did not call her a see you next Tuesday over and over and over again. And when it comes to the bubbling up thing that Erika's talking about, listen, I'm on Dorit's side here. Number one, if something was bothering her, very easily she could have went to Dorit, even on camera, and said, listen, Dorit, I want to have a chat with you. But niente, like, she didn't say nothing to Dorit. And I could see where Dorit says she was one person, and then all of a sudden in 12 hours she was a different person. Absolutely. Because that's how it seemed. I mean, in the beginning of the season, Erika was actually saying to Kyle, because remember, At first, Kyle was just going after Dorit for what she was saying about PK. And Erika actually said to Kyle, listen, if you want to get this friendship on track, I'd kind of stay out of it. Don't be in the middle of Dorit and PK. Of course, that wasn't good enough for Kyle. I'm just saying. But so Dorit was defending. Erika was defending Dorit. Now, as the season went on, were things maybe getting to her? Possibly. Do I also think that she realized that possibly she needed to stand on one side of the fence or the other to keep her job? Possibly. But I could see where Dorit sees it like that, because as a viewer, I saw it like that kind of too. So then Andy says, when it comes to Sutton, Dorit, you were basically accusing her of buddying up to Amanda for Kyle. And Sutton said, look, I don't know why Kyle would care if I roomed with Amanda in Italy. She said, but somebody had to do it. And she goes on with this story about how Listen Production had told her that, her and Jennifer were going to share a room together. And Sutton said, well, that's not very fair. I mean, Jennifer, she's like a movie star. And they said, yeah, but the two of you are like sisters. And Sutton says, you have sisters. Think about this a second. But those two weren't going to share together because they wanted their own rooms. So then Natalie was going to be rooming with Amanda. But then Natalie did not want to room with Amanda. Now, Kathy Hilton whispers into Rachel's ear during the reunion. And she says, yeah, Natalie didn't want to room with her because she wanted to jack off. And Kathy Hilton is exploding with this information. It was weird the way she acted. I don't know. It was just weird. But anyway, this is Sutton explaining this. And I do believe that Sutton is right in this. Now, Sutton says there was no strategy about it. I'm not that smart. I'm just doing my thing, and, but, did that happen? Probably yes. However, Sutton could have stood her ground and said, no, I want my own room. You got two sisters. They can share. But she didn't say that, did she? Because she's always up Kyle's butt. We've talked about this before. And so even though she specifically didn't come out and say it, it's like a backhand. You know what I mean? Listen, Dorit was on this year. Activated Dorit was on it. So then Andy says, well, your relationship with Erika has gotten really good. Sutton says yes. Erika says Sutton is funny. She's warm. She's a good time. Andy says, that on Watch What Happens Live, Dorit, you said that Erika was becoming closer with Sutton because Sutton was a social climber. Dorit says, well, yeah, she's invited to parties and stuff like that. And Kathy Hilton looks at Sutton and says, why don't you explain to her that you're not a social climber, you're a socialite? And Dorit says, were you offended? Sutton's like, well, it's not the nicest thing to say. And she says, well, then I apologize. Sutton's like, okay. And then Dorit says, did you really fall for that apology? What? That was a little strange, I have to say. But, you know, so, basically, Andy says, well, that friendship's in the shitter. So where do you two go from there, and do you think you can see yourselves becoming friends again? Dorit's like, we'll see. Sutton's like, I don't know. Then they're recapping about being in the Hamptons and the women having a good time at different events. And then Andy brings up that Jennifer Tilly had mentioned that the reason why Sutton's husband wanted their marriage annulled is because he wanted to be able to marry her friend in the Catholic Church. Which, if you didn't know that, I mean, she has kept pretty quiet about that, but it was a very good friend of hers that her husband was cheating on her with. And they are now getting married. It is a gut punch with everything else. That probably was like the icing on the cake. And I think that's what Jennifer Tilly was trying to explain. And so Andy says to Kyle, what would you do? Kyle says, I would kill him. Kyle is a very jealous person, if you have not seen this over the years. I also think that this is where her and Dorit's friendship went right down. Because first, Kyle didn't like how handsy Dorit was with Mauricio. Then there were all these rumors flying around that something was going on between these two. So then when she started dating Morgan Wade, man, she wanted to keep Dorit clear of Morgan Wade. See how jealous? And so that was the end of it. Like, sure, there's other things, but you know what I mean. I'm just proving my point that she is a jealous person. And she's admitted that, actually. She's admitted it. So then we start talking about Bose's engagement, how she's planning 2 weddings. Everyone's going to be invited as long as she's getting along with them. Andy mentions her fertility journey. She says that, yes, they are going to harvest more eggs. If that does not work, then they're going to look at getting a donor egg. And if that doesn't work, then yes, they will look at adoption. Andy says to Bose, during Watch What Happens Live, you were asked what Amanda is good at, and you replied, scamming. And Bose says, that was harsh. I'm sorry. I didn't really mean it. I was just angry because you had stated that I was jealous of you. And Amanda says, oh, no, I never said that. When they show you her confessional, and yes, she does say that. Then they start talking about the whole Pinocchio comment. And Bose says, look, I'm shady. That was just a throwaway comment to the point that I couldn't even remember saying it. And then Kyle jumps in and is like, well, it's really Natalie who, stirred it up and answered it wrong and all this stuff. So apparently Natalie must be on Kyle's bad side for some reason. And then Andy says to Amanda, you said that Bose is kind of skeptical. And Amanda says, well, I didn't appreciate when she was questioning me thinking of my stepkids as my own. And Bose says, no. I asked you if the kids were his, which she did. And then and then Amanda's response was, well, I'm raising them. And then in Bose's confessional, she says, if my daughter was calling somebody else mom, I would have a huge problem with it because there's only one mother here And that's me. Listen, I agree. I mean, I would get really upset, to be quite honest, if one of my children were calling some other chick mom. You know what I mean? And it's not even the titling of mom. If the mother is still involved in the children's lives, I would really have a problem with the way Amanda said, "Well, I'm raising them," as if there's no other parent involved, like the mother is not involved. Then I would have a problem with it. You know what I mean? Um, then, you know, Amanda and Bose both lost a child. Andy's commenting on that. Amanda says that she was really appreciative of all the fans and their support. She wasn't expecting that. Bose then explains that, look, there are times when she didn't feel like getting out of bed. It was a real struggle, but never did she use it as a strategic way. And what she's talking about is at that dinner when Dorit goes to confront Amanda about talking about her and her husband. And instead of answering the question, Amanda comes back with that response of, "Can I just tell you that today's the 3-year anniversary of Zion's death?" And Dorit's like, "Wait a minute, what?" Like, that's what she's talking about. And I agree with Bose, by the way. And Amanda says, "Look, I just wasn't expecting you to be so harsh with your words and aggressive." And Dorit says, "Actually, you accused me of accosting you." And Amanda says, "Well, in my state of mind at the time, yeah, that's how it was." No, she did not accost you, Amanda. That's where you play victim. And I agree with Bose. Um, and then they recap to where we all know to be true. Kyle going to everyone about Dorit. And, Dorit saying, "You're going through and causing all this crap, and I'm going through all this with PK and the kids, and, I don't expect it to be directed from you, Kyle." And she said, "It's all because you went to the entire group because you had a plan." And Erika says, "You don't believe that, do you?" Really, Erika? I know you're not an idiot. And I know you've seen the show. And Dorit says, "Yeah, I do believe she had a plan." Um, and then, of course, Kyle's like, "Why don't you say something, Bose? Like, you had a lot to say too, it wasn't just me." And then Bose says, "Yes. But see, after I spoke to you, I then took it to Dorit. Not only that, but I also defended you and said that I felt as though you were coming from a good place. And I did that all the time." And even Kyle was like, "Oh, because they didn't air it, so I wouldn't have known that." Everyone's like, "Yeah, they aired it." I mean, don't even get me started. Um, so, they do show you with her defending her over and over again. And then, like Bose said, but when the cover release party came about, then I felt like a fool, she said. And then in her confessional, she had made a good point, which was, this whole season, Kyle's been, "Oh my gosh, Dorit's, financial loom." But then when Dorit has a financial win, crickets, you're nowhere to be found. Well, of course, Kyle right away to Andy. She gets her phone out. Look, see, Andy, I sent her this beautiful text. I wanted her to know, like, how important she was to me and how much I love and cared about her. Now listen, Kyle is right. On the best day, she probably would have had a problem getting there. And I agree with Kyle because I think it was 48 hours to her daughter's wedding. There's all these last minute things to do. I totally get it. But she could have also stopped by just for 5 minutes. I mean, from what I understand, the event was literally like down the street from her house. I'm just saying. So then, Kyle now is saying to Bose, well, you and I now can't have a friendship because of this. And she's looking at Dorit. And Bose is like, that's separate. I mean, whew. And then Dorit says, look, Kyle even, turned Sutton and Erika against me. And Sutton says, look, I'm really sorry if you feel as though I turned against you because I do not want you to feel that way. And Dorit says, because Kyle kept saying, everyone's saying this. Everyone's talking about you, Dorit, as if she's collecting her minions. And that is what she said. Everyone. Sutton says, look, I would not follow Kyle's orders. Well, Dorit, I mean, she was right on this reunion. It could be her last, but she was right on this reunion. I mean, she isn't activated Dorit. Right away, she turned around and she said to Sutton, you mean you wouldn't bow down to the altar of Kyle Richards? And they recap back about when Sutton is saying, I will not bow down to the altar of Kyle Richards. And she's saying this to Garcelle, and Garcelle rolls her eyes like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. And Sutton says, no, ma'am. You know how Sutton can be with that southern drawl. And Dorit says, listen, everybody talks about how Kyle basically has the power to get anybody off the show. And even Erika and I have talked about that. And Erika says, I said that? Dorit's like, yeah, you and I have talked about it. I don't think Kyle has the power to get anybody fired. I don't. I do think, however, that Kyle has the power to make your life hell. Proven this season with Dorit. You see what I'm saying? And if you want to keep your job, that's what you have to do, is stay on Kyle's side. I also find it interesting that all these ladies did not say a word. I mean, unless they were directly spoken to. The only ones conversing in this entire reunion, basically, was Dorit, Kyle, and Erika. I mean, the rest, like, mum was the word, unless they were literally spoken to. And that's why. I'm telling you, this is why. So then Rachel says, listen, I've spoken to Dorit about her lateness. I don't like when she's late. I even joke around that it's Dorit's time. She said, but I didn't want to be looped in this whole quote unquote group thing of I'm worried about her finances. I'm worried about her mental state. Like, because I wasn't, Erika says, I think the thing is, well, then Andy turns around and makes a great point, which is like to Dorit and says, weren't you always late? Dorit's like, thank you. And so Andy's like, was it like some huge thing? Because like, she's always been late. And Erika says, well, I think the problem is that Dorit is a very important part of the cast. And Dorit's like, yeah. And Erika says, so when you go missing for 2 hours, Dorit's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. when did I go missing for 2 hours? And Erika says, during the pizza party, you disappeared for 2 hours. And Dorit says, no, I was there all night. But did I leave? Yeah, because I was tired of defending myself. And Andy says, so you're not sorry? She's like, no, I'm not sorry. She says, I was tired of defending myself. And Kyle says, well, in Italy, you said that we should talk to you. And Dorit jumps down Kyle's throat. And she's like, no, Kyle, what I said is stop talking behind my back. And, Dorit says, she's just going crazy here, and she says to Erika, I don't mean to loop you into this, and I'm sorry. And Erika says, do you mean it? Dorit goes, no, Erika, I'm an effing cold-hearted see you next Tuesday. And then Andy says, I have to tell you that I've never seen Erika so upset as she was at that table. And Dorit says, I agree with you, Andy, but then look what happened, the situation I had with my cover release. I didn't get a text. I didn't get a phone call. And Erika says, yeah, that's right. You didn't because I was upset. But Dorit, she said to Erika, I kept asking you, what did I do to you, Erika? And then Dorit kind of slides it in there, it must be hard having someone to tell you to go against me. And Erika said, nobody has told me to go against you, Dorit. I have to say that not only at the table in Italy, but also even at the reunion, you could visibly see Erika was upset. I do believe that Erika cares about Dorit. I also think that Erika cares about Kyle. I also think that Erika needs to look after for herself. And I'm wondering if she's visibly upset because if she wants to keep a paycheck, she knows what side she has to go to. And if that's against Dorit, then it's going to be against Dorit. You know what I mean? Especially because if this was all bubbling and coming to a head, why wouldn't you have said something to Dorit? Why wouldn't you have turned around and said to her, listen, let's have a chat? Also in Italy, Erika said, I don't like when somebody tells me to shut up. I don't like when you put your hand in my face, which, by the way, Dorit never did any of that. And it was also proved that Dorit did not take the car, the only car, away and left these two stranded. Give me a break. But these two, Kyle and Erika, made that a storyline of how selfish Dorit was. She took the only transportation we had. We were stranded. No, you weren't, because cameras were still up and rolling on you. So you weren't stranded. And then, Kathy jumps in and says to Dorit, look, I don't want to stir the pot. She says, but, I see you wanting to basically make things right with Erika, but I don't see you doing that with my little sister. What has she done to you that's been so bad? So she spoke to PK a couple times. Who cares? And Dorit's like, I love that you see that. And then Dorit starts explaining to Kathy, but your sister's been talking behind my back to every single person here and blah, 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 all the way down the line where Kathy couldn't say a word. Have you been following? Then Andy says, that Kyle, Dorit, Erika, like you've been through so much over the years as friends together, like his same old question, where do you go from here? And Kyle's like, well, I don't hold grudges. I'll just stab you in the back. And no, that's not what she said, but that's what I was thinking. She says, no, I don't hold grudges, but I think I just need a break from Dorit. And Erika says, look, I want the Dorit back, the one that I love. And this is not that Dorit. And so I'm going to take a step back until she shows up. And man, Dorit hit this one right on the nail. Because she was like, it's funny you say that, Erika. She said, because I remember someone telling me that you really know when somebody's a friend, not when they show up just for the good times, but they show up for the bad times too. She's like, so don't worry, Erika. I won't knock on your door until things are good with me. Mm-hmm. I mean, Dorit was really on. Like, nobody can say she wasn't. She wasn't like pulling things out of the air. She literally had her facts down. And then Andy says, well, in respect for Amanda, he is obsessed with Amanda Francis. He says, I would like everybody to manifest, from the Amanda Francis impact. Not only that, but they end this reunion with a, what did he call it? Those specific matcha, ritual matcha, whatever she called it. So that was their drink that they were toasting to. And of course, Kyle says at the end in the toast, she says, and Dorit, I know you don't think this, but I do love and I do care about you. And then she kind of nods at Andy like, there you go. Just me being nice. That is where the reunion left off. That's where the reunion left off, ended. So what'd you guys think? Listen, I've said this multiple times during the course of this season. I love an activated Dorit, and I was here for it. If it wasn't for Dorit and trying to get to the back history of Amanda Francis, there wouldn't have been a show. There really wouldn't have been. Do I think there should be a cast shakeup? Yes, I do. With that being said, I think Kyle should take a pause. I've already stated this before. When you are just playing producer, when you are plotting against other cast members to the point that nobody will say anything because they want their jobs, you don't really have a show. I think she should go on pause. And because she's gotten too big for her britches. And then she can come back when she's ready to share her life, when she's ready to let the producers produce and her be a cast member just like everyone else. That's what I think about that. The unfortunate thing is that Dorit stood up to Kyle all season. She did not let her get away with anything. She proved her point that Kyle did go to every single woman in the cast, talking about her. And that was kind of brushed over. It really was. Which shows you where Andy stands with Kyle and Dorit. So do I think Dorit is coming back next season? I'm not sure. I'm thinking no. But do I think Sutton's coming back next season? I'm not sure about that one either. I don't think Sutton will come back next season if she doesn't come back. I think it's because she's been so far up Kyle's ass, in plain words, that that's been her downfall. Just take this season alone. She was forging a friendship with Dorit. Then all of a sudden in Italy, she switched around and said to Amanda Francis, did you like when she started talking about the cult thing? If I were you, I would say something that wasn't very nice and all this stuff. Really? Mm-hmm. And who was sitting next to her? Good old Kyle. Same thing with Erika. Erika was actually, I don't want to say defending Dorit to Kyle, but she was saying, look, if you care about this friendship, stay out of it between her and PK. Kyle went to every single person in the group. I think at one point she went to Erika. It's not shown on camera, but I think she brought it to Erika's attention of like, I'm so sick and tired of her being late all the time. She's late. And I'll tell you what, though, in Italy, there was a change where all of a sudden, Erika was like, I've had enough of you. Do I believe that conversation happened between Dorit and Erika, where Dorit was like, if you want to keep your job, you need to start sharing more? Yeah, I do. Even in the reunion, I think Dorit was trying to get that message across to the point of like, look, Eric, even at that dinner, just take the dinner alone. When Dorit was saying, do you have a lot going on? And Kyle right away was like, yeah, it's in the news. I think what Dorit was trying to say without breaking the fourth wall per se, what she was trying to say is you're not talking about what's going on in your life. I am like an open book this season. I'm talking about PK. I'm talking about my kids. I'm talking about my friction with Kyle. Right? And mum's the word with you, Erika. You're not talking about your $25 million lawsuit. You're not talking that you have a new boyfriend. Like, you're not talking about anything. And that was true. So, yeah, I think even though Dorit had a strong season, she really carried this season, actually, because like I said, if it wasn't for her, can you imagine how the show would have been? I also think it might be her last season. And that's no thanks to probably Kyle. But I do have to say one thing. It is no coincidence that TMZ dropped that article from PK stating how Dorit spends all this money and he was just trying to pay all the bills. I also found it interesting that he used the word erratic. Heard that before, right? So it's not a coincidence that this article dropped the day after the reunion aired. Somebody would have told him what was going on, what the reunion was like, what was being aired, probably on what day. Wow, Kyle, such a girl's girl. Who needs enemies when they have friends like you? And now Dorit, of course, is coming back defending herself. If you noticed in TMZ, she released her text messages where PK is saying, no, I don't know what you're talking about, foreclosure. That's just a sales letter. Of course she's going to try and defend herself because it made her look like an idiot. But I can tell you this. It is not a coincidence that TMZ dropped that. It is no coincidence. Somebody has been talking to PK, keeping him updated on what was going on throughout the season. Dorit's spending, erratic behavior, OCD, all of that. Somebody was keeping him informed. This is how the reunion went. This is what was discussed right before it ended. No coincidence whatsoever. And I will say it again. Such a girl's girl, Kyle. Who needs enemies like you when they got friends like you, right? Or no, wait a minute. Did I say that right? Let's try this again. Who needs enemies like you when they've got friends like you? Did I just say that right again? You know what I mean. It's true. Not a coincidence. And now this is left to Dorit trying to defend herself. Listen, they always say there's 3 sides. 2 sides and then the actual truth. Right? Dorit has her side, he has his side, and then there's the actual truth. The problem here is that somebody is kind of helping his side out. I don't know who that is. But I do think it could cost Dorit her job. I mean, even on Watch What Happens Live, Andy said, yeah, I don't see a resolution with Dorit or something along those lines, which made me go, So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. You never know. But what did you guys think? Now we'll just have to wait and see who's going to be cast for next season. And when are they picking those cameras up, right? What do you think? What do you think? Honestly, think Kyle should go on pause? I do. I think she should. I'm not saying fire her, but I do think she's gotten too big for her britches and she should go on pause. When the whole cast is scared to even say anything up against you, you don't have a show. You know what I mean? You don't have a show, especially when it's expected of them to share their lives, but not expected of you. I mean, you could just be a friend of then, right? Like your sister Kathy. I'm just saying. But let's continue this conversation down below in the comments. And you know what to do before you do that. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, because here we break the dish.